I was in the middle of a private, high-level conversation with the state attorney general inside my lake cabin, talking about land rights and zoning corruption, when the front door suddenly slammed open and stormed a woman I'd never seen before, her face twisted with entitlement and outrage. She didn't knock, she didn't ask. She just barged in, barking orders like she owned the place. Turns out, she was the HOA president, and she was here to inspect my property because she thought it violated community rules. What she didn't know, not only was I well within my rights, I was the sole developer and legal owner of the entire lakeside project. And the look on her face when she realized who she had just interrupted, with the state's top legal official sitting at my table, was something I'll never forget. Let me back up for a second, because you need to understand why this moment was so outrageous. I bought this land 2 years ago, 280 acres of untouched lakeside property, and developed it with my own money, sweat, and vision. It was meant to be a peaceful retreat, not just for me, but for future investors and vacationers. The cabin she barged into, I built it from the ground up, legally, with full permits. They were formed after I completed the project, and they've been trying to claw control ever since, acting like I'm some outsider who needs to follow their petty rules. What they didn't realize was that I'm not just some tenant or renter. I'm the one who signed off on the very roads they drive on, and that meeting with the state attorney general, it wasn't just casual, it was strategic, because I'd already been gathering evidence on the HOA's overreach for months. And now, Karen had just walked right into a trap of her own making. Things didn't explode overnight. It started subtly, almost like a game. First, I received a passive-aggressive letter taped to my gate, claiming my dock was violating HOA aesthetic standards. Then it was a complaint about my cabin's exterior paint, too dark, they said, not community approved. They ignored the fact that the HOA didn't even exist when I built it. Neighbors I'd never spoken to began giving me sideways glances. One day, I caught a board member taking photos of my property from behind the trees. Still, I stayed quiet. Wanted to see how far they'd go. The tension slowly thickened. When guests rented the cabin for weekends, they were harassed, told they couldn't park in front of the house, even though the road was public. And when I pushed back with legal documents and boundary maps, the HOA president, Karen, doubled down. She claimed she'd have no choice but to escalate. I didn't know at the time that her idea of escalation would be so brazen, so entitled, or so perfectly timed to blow up in her face. The breaking point came just days before. The cabin was scheduled to host a private event with local officials, including the state attorney general himself. Karen must have seen the out-of-state cars arriving, the security detail checking the perimeter, and assumed I was violating some imagined HOA rule. That morning, as guests began to arrive and I reviewed documents with my legal team inside the cabin, I saw her standing at the edge of the property, arms crossed, staring like she was calculating her next move. And then she made it. With a clipboard in one hand and a cell phone in the other, she marched up the driveway and began filming the cabin, loudly claiming I was conducting unauthorized business on HOA land. Minutes later, to local police, officers pulled up, responding to her call. She really thought she could intimidate me in front of my guests by weaponizing authority. But what she didn't realize was that every step she took was being recorded, and the man she was about to confront inside the cabin wasn't just a guest. He was the highest-ranking legal official in the state. What happened next? Karen's entire fantasy of control came crashing down. Karen stomped up to the front porch like she was about to shut down a backyard barbecue, not a private, invitation-only meeting sanctioned by the state. She didn't knock. She didn't pause. She barged through the door, puffed up with authority, and launched into a loud speech about HOA bylaws and unauthorized gatherings. But the room fell awkwardly silent as she realized who was sitting across the table. From me, the State Attorney General, calm, composed, and clearly unimpressed. Karen's voice faltered. She tried to save face by rattling off rules about property use, but the AG leaned forward and said, without even raising his voice, "Ma'am, do you have legal jurisdiction here?" Her eyes darted around the room as she realized she'd just interrupted a private legal summit in a property she had no authority over. I stood up, handed her a binder of documents, land ownership, HOA exemptions, legal precedents, and let her flip through it in real time. You could see the blood drain from her face as the reality set in. Not only was she wrong, she had just overstepped in front of the very official who could dismantle her entire position of power. The silence in that room, it was deafening. Karen stood frozen, binder in hand, her face flushing deeper by the second. The Attorney General calmly laid out the facts. The HOA had no authority over my land, no jurisdiction over the cabin, and had filed multiple unfounded complaints that bordered on harassment. One of the officers, clearly embarrassed to be part of her little stunt, stepped outside to make a call. Minutes later, a county official arrived, someone I'd worked with before, and confirmed, on the record, that Karen and her HOA had no legal standing whatsoever on my property. She tried to deflect, to claim she was just following up on resident concerns, but no one was buying it anymore. Her power play had become a public meltdown, and when the Attorney General himself warned that further harassment could lead to legal repercussions, she finally backed down, mumbling something about miscommunication as she stumbled out the door. That moment, watching the so-called queen of the HOA walk off my property with her clipboard clutched to her chest and no shred of control left, was everything I didn't know I needed. The message was clear. This cabin was mine and her. Rain was over after everything calmed down. I sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea, watching the sun set over the lake, and I couldn't help but reflect on how ridiculous it had all become. What started as an entitled neighbor flexing fake authority turned into a full-blown confrontation with law enforcement, and ultimately a public humiliation in front of the state's top legal figure. But this wasn't just about Karen. It was about power, assumptions, and the lengths some people will go to in order to control what they don't own. See, too often, people like her confuse loudness with leadership and think a clipboard gives them the right to bully others. But when you stand your ground with facts, patience, and just a little help from the law, the truth always wins out. This wasn't just a win for me. It was a reminder to every property owner out there. Know your rights. Protect what's yours, and never let someone else rewrite your story just because they feel entitled to. And as for Karen, let's just say she won't be showing up uninvited again. But here's the wild part. Just when I thought it was over, Karen wasn't done. A week later, I got a letter from the HOAS legal team threatening to fine me for emotional distress and claiming I had intimidated her with my guests. Yeah, you heard that right. She tried to flip the entire situation on me again, but this time I had something she didn't: a full recording, multiple eyewitnesses, and the backing of the Attorney General's office. So if you think this story was wild, wait until you hear what happened when I walked into their next board meeting with my attorney and played the footage on a projector. Trust me, You don't want to miss that. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, drop a comment, leave this video if you've ever dealt with an entitled HOA nightmare.